You are listening to the People Centric Podcast, where we talk through the toughest challenges that people face at work and give practical advice to fixing those challenges. Thanks for joining our movement to create workplaces that are happier, healthier, aligned, and empowered by putting people at the center of all that we do.
Hey, people-centric leaders. I want to tell a story. This is Don Harkey, and I want to tell a story. I need to tell my name. I realize this. People come back and they're like, who's talking right now? Right, Diana? Don't you get that feedback from time to time?
From time to time, I do. Yeah, of course. It's usually not you. It's usually they mix up all the girls' voices.
It's usually me and Diane. Oh, you just said all the girls' voices. Never. This doesn't work anymore. It's usually me and Diana. We sound so much alike. It's the
so
laugh.
much.
Yeah, and that wasn't Diana. That was Philip. Everybody who's listening,
but they couldn't tell, could they?
They couldn't tell. It's all different.
We sound exactly alike.
That's alignment. That's alignment.
Today you're getting a Don, Diana, and Philip episode of the People Centric Podcast, which good for you guys. Way to join us on this. But we were talking about a story that happened recently. We're working with a large organization, and they had a mid to upper level manager who was struggling in their role quite a bit. And they were not really doing some things strategically to set up their team. And when their upper management dove into that a little bit, what they discovered was this manager who has managers working for them stated that their managers weren't making good decisions. And so they didn't trust the decisions that were being made. So that person, the upper manager, had to dive into the details to learn more about what was going on. And so by diving into the details and getting into that, they were getting more into the weeds and not being able to spend a lot of time strategically thinking about the direction of the organization. And they realized as they took a step back that that was kind of true throughout their whole organization, that they set these different levels and you have different titles and you move up in the organization and you take these different roles, but that they really hadn't defined like what those roles are or what success is or how to manage performance within that. So then they've seen stories, and we talked about some of those where you had some people who said, boy, I used to be a supervisor and I was successful by knowing the details. So they keep diving into the details and learning all of that. And so then they get lost, but then they don't do the strategic thinking side of things. And then they move up in the organization and nobody's making those decisions. Or the other thing happens is sometimes people say, okay, I'm going to now just stay big picture, but they didn't prepare anybody else below them to make all the tactical decisions. So now they're only thinking big picture. And now people feel disconnected from this. This is all under an umbrella of what we call performance management. And we've done a lot of different episodes for the supervisors who are listening to say, how do you give feedback? How do you have difficult conversations? Why should you do check-ins? Those types of things. But we thought we would do one where we kind of zero back a little bit and say, what is a performance management system and why should you have that? Why should you consider that? I think if you're a frontline employee, we know that a lot of you are saying, I wish I got more feedback on my performance and I don't know how to perform. If you are a mid-level manager, we know that you're probably looking at this saying, how do I give the performance feedback? When do I give performance feedback? What does that look like? And what's a performance management system? What does that look like? And then if you're an executive, you should definitely be asking what a performance management system is, because I promise you that your competitor across the street is implementing one. And if you're not implementing one, they're going to soon be stealing your employees because there's a workforce shortage out there. And performance management is a key system that you have got to have if you're going to be competitive for getting employees. So this one's got a little bit of something for everybody. Are you guys excited about this?
I mean, as excited as anyone can get about performance management systems, yes.
That's really fair. That's really fair. If we're jumping in on this, it's like you can get excited about this topic, but are we super, super excited about this?
I was going to say, this is Philip, not Diana now. We're stoked. I'm stoked. I think it's great because all the times we talk with people and there's confusion and it's frustrating and everyone wants to know if they're doing a good job or not. And so helping people do that, yes. So I'm very excited.
Yeah. And then from the road, we just had Bethany join us as well. So she's joining our podcast so that we can talk about performance management. And Bethany, tell me the truth, is this your favorite topic?
No.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for your honesty.
Yeah. No, it's truthfully, is it my favorite topic of all the topics we've talked about? No, probably not. Do I think it's important? Yes, I do. I sure do.
That was an unfair question just to ambush you on that, but vulnerability is important on our team, so that's important for all of us. So okay, so let's dive in first. Let's get really basic. Like, let's talk about performance for an employee and why just feedback in general and performance is important. We know, I'll throw out a couple statistics and then let's talk a little bit about like what are some of the best practices and why it's important. But some of the statistics that are out there is that most employees feel like they would like to get more feedback. And I think the number I saw was like 62, 63%, something like that, if I'm remembering correctly, of employees say, I would like more feedback from my supervisor. We know that supervisors and managers also say, I need to know how to give that feedback to my employees. And we also know that many supervisors and managers are afraid to talk to their employees about just about anything on a basis. We found a study that said that 69% of supervisors and managers are scared to talk to their employees because they're afraid that they're going to get them upset about something. They're just showing up every day. We also know that we live in a world right now where a lot of people feel held hostage by their employees. I'm just glad that you showed up today. So I don't want to tell you that you're not doing a great job, because you may not show up at all, and you doing half the work that you're supposed to be doing is better than you doing none of the work that we're doing. So we hear all of these things. So I wanted to set up that climate, but from our team, why is the performance feedback important? Like what role does it play in the performance of not just that individual, but also the company?
So, first of all, I love how you were like, employers feel taken hostage by their employees. My, how the tables have turned. That's what I want to say about that real quick. Because I feel like for a long time, we have felt like we can't go anywhere. And now the tide has shifted.
It
we
has,
hold
yeah.
the power for once.
Yeah. I like how you say we, Diana, but you are like a C-level employee in our company. So you are kind of they, just so you know that.
But it's different here, right, guys? It's different, right, guys? It's different. Right, guys?
Yeah. You guys love working here, right?
They're like weirdly nodding. I
They're
don't
both
believe
nodding.
I
It's a
can't see it.
podcast episode. They can't
Oh
hear you.
yeah. Yes.
It's yes.
Oh,
Blinking
so
twice.
good. You're
Blinking
right, Diana.
twice.
But beside the point, whether I am a they or a them, besides that point, I wanted to say that yes, I think performance management is super important because everybody shows up to work wanting to do a good job. I don't believe that most people show up day in and day out and are like, let's burn it to the ground. I think most people show up and want to do a good job. And their managers are either looking at that and saying, yes, you're doing a good job, or no, you're doing a bad job, but not really sharing that information one way or another. And I think a lot of times managers are confounded and mad because their employees are not doing a good job, but their employee doesn't know that. And they're showing up and like doing everything they think is right. And then the manager is like, you have not done anything I've wanted you to do. So I think that weird alignment piece is necessary. And so that's why these conversations are important.
So it sounds like what you're saying is it's important both for the company and for the employee in terms of engagement level, right? We know that Gallup states that 70% of disengagement is created by the relationship between the employee and the manager. And we know that a lot of that happens because there's not a conversation. There's not a moment where we're judging performance, where we're being able to say things about how are you doing. So it's important for everybody. So then when I say performance management, like typical companies may look at that as like, well, that's the annual performance appraisal. That's what you're talking about. We've talked about this before a little bit. Is that what we're talking about when we say performance management is the annual performance appraisal?
I mean, not really. I think that's part of it. Would you guys agree or disagree?
Yeah, I would say it is a part, right? And that's usually when I think a lot of our clients are like, oh, this is when usually money is at stake, or, everyone has a different process and it's very stressful and no one's excited for it and nobody even wants to do it. But I would say it could be a useful tool, but ideally performance management is ongoing. And I'm not huge for sports analogies. In our household, we always refer to mini sports as sports ball because there's so many types. We support our friends. That's all we do. But I think it is similar to when someone, and I have friends who are quite the athletes. It's not like you once a year would be playing on the field and then your coach or your team would pull you in and talk to everyone and say, hey, by the way, pitcher, you're not doing very well. Like you do it in the moment, like, oh, wow, you ran in the wrong direction. Home base is here and not there. Like you wouldn't wait until a year and then wait again another year. That does not help performance.
Yeah, our friends at the Great Game of Business always use the example of like, it's imagine bowling blindfolded, right? If you rolled the ball down and then you played an entire game and you never got any feedback on how you were doing, like, you actually just took out, the server who was bringing our food and our drinks over to us while you were bowling, and you knocked him over because you kept rolling in completely the wrong direction. We're very disappointed in you, taking that long. Plus, I think a lot of people have had the experience where you have the performance appraisal. That's the annual one where somebody sits down next to you and says, hey, Don, hey, most of your work is really, really good, but last April, you did this, and I didn't talk to you about it at the time, but I did write it down so that we could talk about it now. And how demotivating that is, how crushing that kind of a thing is.
Yeah, it's also just not effective because, I mean, to continue our sports analogies, and me and Philip are the most sportsy people on this team. So I'm glad we're the ones talking about this. But I have a son who really is a good little athlete, and he's in youth sports, so we're learning all kinds of things right now. But there's but we're watching the difference in how and the different types of coaching he's getting at this level, because it's very hit or miss when you're 6 years old, so we've seen him on teams where he is in a game and it's a coach that maybe is just a stand-in or something because their normal coach isn't there and they're not super effective at like coaching them throughout the game. And so we are watching from the stands saying, oh, that was really bad. Like the coach needs to tell him that. And because otherwise he has no idea that he messed that thing up. So he'll do it again. He has no idea. And it won't be effective if he waits until the end of the game to be like, hey, by the way, do you remember that thing? Because he may not. But we've also seen then in the same time, we've seen another coach come in and coach them throughout the game consistently. And it was amazing how much they improved in like their success as a team and how they played in one game with some really good coaching throughout it, even if that coach had not been the one coaching them all along. So it's just really important. It makes such an impact too. And so I love that just visual for me is what stood out in terms of what it looks like to give that feedback ongoing and immediately. And so it's in context for people and all of those things.
Here's some feedback. That was a lot of passion for someone who is not very excited to talk about this. So,
different when it's your kid. You want to.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. I love that.
Yeah. All parents of sports kids are sports people. That's a fact. When you're watching that game, it's intense. You're like, I want to win, do this, destroy that other kid, run over them. Right. Yeah. I was thinking of an example. Matt's not on this episode, but his one of his daughters, Annalyn, did a swim meet today, and they were doing a medley. So that means the kid swims across the pool, another kid jumps in on the other side of the pool, but they're little kids. And sometimes they get messed up a little bit, and they blew the whistle, and the kids jumped in on a couple teams on both sides of the pool in the same lane. And then you're in the pool, so you can't hear anybody yelling at you that you've done the wrong thing. So these two kids are basically swimming at each other in the same lane, just destined to collide in the middle of the pool, in the middle of a race that they're supposed to run. So I mean, the whole race, like you can't finish it now. And it's like, it's all kinds of messed up and everything. And it's like, imagine if they got out of the pool and no one ever told them anything, right? Or flip it around and say, like, imagine what happens, because they were like, how do you avoid that from happening in the first place? Well, you avoid that from happening by like the coaches and even the timers and stuff standing on the side of the pool, knowing that, hey, these kids are little. I just need to remind them, like, hey, on this side of the pool, when they blow that whistle, don't jump in right away. Like, I know you're going to want to. Your instinct's going to be like, jump in. This is the race, but don't do it yet. You jump in when they get over here. And I know it's tempting to think, well, I don't want to offend anybody. I don't want to upset them because they know what their job is and they know they're supposed to be doing that. But if you give that feedback immediately, it's a lot more natural. Like, it doesn't feel like it's a negative feedback. What we see time and time again is if a supervisor, manager, director, executive, or whatever doesn't give feedback very often, when they go to give the feedback, what it is, it's a whole moment. You're like, hey, can I talk to you for a second? And it's like, okay, dead man walking, come into my office, right? Sit across from me. I'm about to give you some feedback on something. And people get really nervous about it. If we're just used to talking and giving the feedback, which also means, by the way, and we've talked about this in another episode, giving positive feedback, saying, hey, I saw what you did there. That was fantastic. Hey, this was really good. I liked how you did this. Then the feedback becomes more natural. And that's how really good coaches coach. They're out there saying, hey, that was a nice shot. Hey, good job doing this. Hey, watch your form on this one. Or, hey, don't forget to do this. And then it just becomes part of the game. You don't think, oh my gosh, I can't believe my coach is picking me out for all of that kind of stuff. So that's really good. So let's talk, but if we're talking about performance management system, we've said that that's just part of it. Like the ability to give that feedback is just a little part of it. What about the role that people play? Like, do we know really what success is? Now, this is something that might surprise you, especially if you're an executive of a company. And I'm going to make a statement, and team, you can shoot back at me. Like I couldn't prevent you if you wanted to, but we often see that at the end of the day, like, oh, everybody knows what their role really is. Like when we do workshops or when we do conferences, we'll put that out there and say, do your people know what their roles are? And the most common answer that we get is, oh yeah, of course our people know what their roles are. But then when we get in and we talk to people, we just had a meeting with a group, and it was a group of administrators and one of the top people in a healthcare system. And one of them, I went to them and I said, are you clear about what your role really is? And she looked at me and she says, no, I'm really glad you said that. I'm not clear about my role. The CEO put me into this position and said, like, we need you. We need you in the position. And she said, and I asked, what do you need me to do? And they said, I just need you to be you. I just need you to be smart. And I just need you to, and that feedback. And she was like, it was so frustrating. And I have no idea exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And I think I'm doing the right thing. And I think they kind of like what I'm doing, but I don't know how it plays together. So the question is like, how common is that? And what's the impact if people don't know their roles inside the organization? What kind of problems does that create?
It is very important because it's like the base level. It's I would say like that's the foundation of performance management, because it's like, okay, this is where we're starting. We can agree, like these are kind of like what we can agree to when you come into a position. But you're right, Don. Actually, I think a lot of people, if you start digging and ask them, like, what is your role actually? We have been surprised at how often that has been our answer. And it's not even, I think most people would be like, well, maybe like we have a job description. And it's like, well, yeah, you might have a job description. Do they even know what it says and how is it created and how generic is it? And like, do you talk about it regularly? And, is it still up to date and relevant and all of those different things? And so I think I would say that's probably like one of the first like foundational things that you should look at within your organization in terms of performance management.
So I love that you said like job descriptions, because that's the place where it should say what your job is. But I know that I'm hearing a lot of people, I can hear people on your side of the podcast. Sometimes when we do this, I can hear people driving in their cars or out for taking the dog for a walk and listening to this saying, well, we have job descriptions, but it doesn't really impact our organization. So let's talk a little bit about that. Like, I think most companies that we work with have job descriptions. What's wrong with those job descriptions? Why isn't it doing what you just described?
It's like when you go and order food at the menu of somewhere, right? And there's this beautiful picture. I think that's a lot of job descriptions. You're like, oh, that's exactly it. But then whatever it is that you order comes out on your plate. You're like, that's not what I thought. That is very different. And I think we talked to lots of people where that's exactly what their hiring conversation was. They had this picture of the perfect burger bun and just the perfect amount of condiment spread. And we care about work-life balance, and culture is great. And yeah, we love performance about it. And we'll have an annual review. And then their burger's not quite that way, and it goes from there. And so I think some of the things that make it different and helpful, and it's not just because I'm hungry, is I think when you lean in with people in that setting to really just ask, rather than what do you do, I always would rather ask the question of what are like the 3 or 5 most important things on your mind, especially when you're not at work. And not that you want people to be working when they're not at work, but if it's on your mind when you're not at work, it's really important, at a certain level. And other things like that too of, hey, well, what are the tasks you most frequently hand off to others, or kind of get more granular. And I think that helps to show what really actually happens and what is most important. Because if you're doing it, it's probably important. And it probably needs to be updated on your job description. So I think a lot of job descriptions have just a lot of extra that doesn't really belong there.
And I think it's natural for jobs to drift over time, right? I'll pick up a responsibility here, or I'll give this to someone else, or somebody quit and I took that job, or whatever it is. I think it's natural for those job descriptions to drift and change and evolve as employees drift and change and evolve. But I don't think it's common for people to go back and update them regularly. That's the part that gets missed.
It gets put in the filing cabinet, and then everybody's like, I think I have it. Let me look at this. I haven't looked at mine in a really long time. I forgot that exists. So that means that the job description to be part of an effective performance management system needs to come up somewhere. And and the place that might come up is, what if it came up in the conversations that you have? So if we're saying a performance management system is not an annual review, it's continuous ongoing feedback, but also coupled with some regular conversations where I am going to talk about like the metrics. I am going to talk about alignment. I am going to talk about the relationships. And you can go back and listen to our episodes about check-ins and the importance of those things. Maybe at times I sit down with the other person and say, let's look at your job description together and let's update this. Let's make sure this actually reflects what you do. One of the things I would add to job descriptions is the way that they're often created is that you go to the person who's doing the job and you say, so what do you do? And then you design it like that. And if you think about it, if we go back to our sports analogies, imagine like a kid's baseball team. And let's use a kid's baseball team versus an MLB team, like an actual kid's baseball team. And you went to the kid who was pitching that day and you said, tell me what it is you do. And he's like, well, I like to hunt for butterflies when I can in between this. I look for butterflies that's what I do. And I'm thinking about like my son playing sports, because that's what he would do, especially playing soccer. It was like, what do you do as the goalie? Well, as the goalie, most of the time, you're really not doing much. So I would find an interesting flower on the ground and I would sit down and pick the flower and count how many bugs are on the flower. Meanwhile, the other team is raining down on him and they're about ready to kick it in. And it's not that he's not gonna be able to block the shot, it's that he's literally picking a flower at the time. He might write that into the job description because that's the way he does it. And that's kind of a hard analogy, but like an easier analogy goes back to what I shared about that story, is that higher to mid-level executive who was getting lost in the weeds. If we ask that person, what do they do? They're like, well, I got to know everything that's going on in my department all the way down. And you would capture that and you would write that down. And that leads to really long job descriptions. You have 3 or 4 page job descriptions that end in "and other duties as assigned," because you've gotten all the things that they're doing, which includes the bad habits. You're picking up the good habits and the bad habits. And we're not narrowing it down to what Philip said of like the 3 or 4 things that are really key in terms of what you do. Like we're missing that piece of that. Let's talk a little bit too about this, not just the job descriptions, but also like, what does success mean? So like if we're measuring job performance, like let's be real. Most of the time when we measure job performance, we go, okay, Diana, let's talk about this. And I'm just going to tell Diana how I feel like she's doing. Most of us do that. Let's be honest. I'm just telling you how I feel like you're doing. How can we make that a little less about how we feel like what you're doing and make it a little bit more about like, how are you actually doing? And let's look at that together. And what's the benefit of that?
I'm a big proponent of measurable things, right? Are you able to do the things that I need you to do within a certain percentage or a certain measurement? And different jobs have different measurables, but every job has a measurable. And I feel like if you can collect that data and say, you are performing at this percentage, that's great, or that's not where we want you to be. That's a really easy conversation to have, right? It's easy to say, no, you're reaching the mark, so you're doing well, or you're really far below the mark. This is where you're at. This is where other people that are doing this job that you're doing is at, and you're not there. Why aren't you there? What can we do to get you there? I think those are really easier conversations to have than, I feel like you're doing okay. It's
Yeah, I feel this is one part of the performance management side of things that I think most people struggle with, is figuring out like what is a really good measure of success, because I think people pick really bad metrics a lot of times. And so then it's like, well, then I'm being measured on something for my job that it's like, it doesn't really, I can't actually like, that metric is not a good indicator for if I'm doing a good job at the things that I'm doing. And I think people do that in a lot of different positions. And so I would just say that this is a really hard one. I'm empathizing with the employer on this one because it's hard. It's difficult to figure out like what's a good way to measure your success here.
It's true. I have an example. We work with a lot of hospitals, and this one person I was talking to was like in facilities, right? They're in a facilities management type thing. So they did like maintenance and stuff. And one of his metrics was length of stay for patients. And he was like, how do I can't affect that. If their light bulb is burnt out, I go in a patient room, but like I can't affect length of stay for the patient. But it's one of my metrics that I'm being measured on. And so I was like, yep, that's a really poor metric for your specific job.
Yeah, that reminds me when I was at 3M and we would get paid bonuses based on the profitability of the adhesives and abrasives division at the time when I was there. And I had no idea what the abrasives part of that division was. Like I was in one of the adhesives plants. And I remember one year, like I kept hearing how great everything was doing and production was super high and all of the other stuff. But apparently this abrasives division like crashed and burned. So like we got no bonuses that year. And it wasn't linked at all. Like, is that linked to my performance? I have no idea how I impact that.
Yeah. And it's true. The organization is looking at it and saying, well, us as an organization, we need to focus on length of stay for the patients. That's, if we can get them out of here sooner, that's cheaper for us. That's better for them. All of these are good things. We want everybody focused on it. But in practicality, the people you were asking to focus on some of those things literally have no way to affect those things.
Yeah. So it seems like you want to zero in on not only what does success for that job look like and success for the company and create line of sight between those two things, which you talked about that before, which line of sight means I know what my job is and how it impacts the company and in turn how that impacts me. That's what line of sight is. But also to recognize what are the outputs, like you talked about before, Diana, but also, and I'm going to use a term that is often used in the sales world, is the high value activities. So like if you think about sales, you can say a key measurement for a salesperson, which is easy to look at, is like how much did I sell? What's the revenue number on that? But another metric that you might do is how many sales calls did I make? That's an activity that you do that's directly going to be related to the output. So it's like you can take some best practices and think, did you do that? I think about for like us, we recognize like client satisfaction is important for us, right? So if Philip or Bethany or Diana or I are working with a client, we want the client to be satisfied with the work, but we recognize that that's kind of hard to measure. So then we started thinking not just directly about client satisfaction, but we started talking about like retention. How long do clients work with us? And that turned out to be a better measurement. But again, on an individual basis, that's a little bit harder to be able to measure. So then I remember like a few years, this was quite a while back. Diana, you probably remember this. We were having conversations where we were digging into like exactly what we were doing with different clients. And one of the things we do with a client that we work with on a regular basis is we have monthly what we call dashboard meetings. And it's a really key part of our system because that's the moment where we hear what the client's objectives are and make sure we're really aligned with those objectives. That's an important piece. And we recognize that we were not doing dashboards for most of our clients. Like we had skipped that. And our team was going, well, I'm keeping them happy and but we don't have the dashboards. So sometimes you might have to, outside the job descriptions, define a best practice or a separate system that says this is a thing that you need to do, and then make sure you're doing that thing. And that's part of the performance. I think a really good universal example is if you're a supervisor, if you're a manager, if you're a director, if you have people that work for you, I think a very basic thing on your job description should be that you oversee that staff and that you are meeting regularly with everybody on your team. And meeting regularly doesn't mean walking past them as you walk through the office doing finger guns and, hey, how was your day? And that kind of stuff. But you are having regular one-to-one meetings with everybody on your team to collect information from them, to see how they're doing, to give feedback, to do all the things that you need to do to make sure you're communicating. That is a very universally known best practice that if you're not doing that, I can pretty much predict where your performance is going to go as a manager. So, I mean, I think you could look for things like that. So let's take a step back. Like we talk about these performance management systems. We said that this is important. I asked the really softball question of saying, is this important? And Bethany said, yes, it is important. Like we're in favor of this. But like, how important is this right now? And why, I think a lot of companies have talked about this, but I was at an HR conference, I'll say it this way. And we asked, hey, how many of you do performance evaluations? And everybody raised their hand. They're all HR people. They're like, of course we do. We're HR people. We do performance evaluations. And I said, how many of you are happy with the system that you have in place? And everybody put their hand back down. Like almost nobody in this big group of people was happy with their system. So we see something was happening before where you could kind of get away with it, not having a good system. But now we're seeing more and more companies saying, I can't get away with this anymore. What's changing? What's happening that's making companies think about this? And why, if you're listening and you're an executive, should you be thinking hard about, do I have a good performance management system in place?
I think we talk a lot about the perfect storm and how employees are not as quickly entering the workforce as employees are leaving the workforce. And so there's creating this like employment gap and this people gap and this skills gap and all of those things. And a good performance management system allows people to learn and grow and know if they're on target and have the conversations they need to have for the company to be successful, for them to be successful. A good performance management allows employees to have the conversations they need to have to stay engaged. And that engagement leads to employee satisfaction. So it's sort of this like, yeah, is it fun? No. Is it super important? Yes. And here's why it's important. Here's all these underlying pieces to it. So I think if you asked us right at the beginning of this, it's not super exciting. It's not a sexy topic. We don't enjoy it, but it is something that is foundational to that employee engagement and that employee retention.
Yeah, it's hard in a moment to think if I sat down with Philip and went over his job description when we're in the middle of a bunch of client meetings and other projects and things we could improve and trying to go get new clients and trying to evangelize the things that we're trying to tell. It's hard to see in that moment, like, why would I want to do that? But if you're doing that systematically and you're checking on it, first of all, it's not a very heavy lift. Like what we're talking about, it sounds like a lot, but really what we're talking about is a regular cadence. And if you just set up a cadence where you met quarterly with every manager, met quarterly with every employee, and you had a series of different types of conversations, and you leave a little bit of autonomy for the manager to decide what's the right conversation for me to have right now, and you make sure you're checking boxes and you're running through the performance management, plus they're giving regular feedback between meetings, that's what we're talking about. It gives you a place to, as Diana said, to really earn engagement amongst your people. And by the way, this is just a subset of a larger system that we talked about, is that integrated leadership system. It's the experience that your employees have, because going back to what Diana said, it's a whole new world. We need to attract employees, and we need to be weirdly good employers to attract employees now. What used to work where we could go through high turnover and just go find new employees, we'll just go make more. It's no big deal. We'll just go out there. There's lots of unemployed people. We'll just put those jobs out there. The numbers I saw recently was there's 8.5 million jobs available in the US right now, and there are 6.1 million unemployed people. So there are literally not going to be enough people on the market to fill all those jobs if we had total employment, where there's still not enough there's still not enough people to fill those jobs. So we're hearing lots of stories where organization A that doesn't have these kinds of systems is just not a good place to work. Organization B is a place that has these systems and is a good place to work. And if you don't think that makes a financial impact, two things is: one, organization B that's put those systems in is attracting people. They're being able to fill orders. The people are engaged. They're doing a better job. And then also, by the way, who do you think has to pay more? What is organization A's answer for trying to fight organization B? Is I got to pay even more than organization B does because my job sucks. Nobody wants to come work here. Side note, if you're an employee in this and you've been listening to this, just wanted to say, like, you might be listening to this going like, preach it. Like, tell me, you're right. I like this. How do I get my employer to do this? One thing you might do is share this episode of this podcast. We're going to throw an assignment out for you. Send this one to your executive team. Like, say, hey, they're talking about something that is really, really important here. We need to get weird. We can't go to that HR conference and be one of those people that doesn't raise their hands anymore. We need to put in a system that really helps people to feel empowered and aligned in their jobs, because they're going to perform their jobs better. They're going to tell other people about it, and other people are going to want to come work for us. And then we're going to be one of the people that doesn't have trouble finding other employees. We're going to be the odd company that doesn't struggle with what's happening right now out in the market. So, all right. Closing thoughts here for everybody. Like, if you gave one tip, I'm going to have everybody give one tip for everybody for performance management system. If you can only do one thing from this podcast, and you can talk to the employees, you talk to the managers, you talk to owners, whoever you want to, one takeaway from this conversation.
I'll go first. I'll just say probably what we talked about early on was just give feedback often and don't be afraid to do that. I don't think you will regret it at all. I think if you do one thing and you start talking to your people more and giving them regular feedback, good and bad, I don't think you're going to regret that. So
it's a good one. I like that.
Mine would probably be on the fact that, what's universal is that everyone we ever work with says there's never enough communication around here. And if you're a manager, then whatever is handed to you from the people above you, like, I don't know, you can't always control that. Ask great questions, but you then can influence that flow of communication to your people. And this is a great tool to do that. So if someone is struggling and they don't know what to do, instead of just being, oh gosh, like these people are so annoying and getting frustrated by it, I think the next step is then like, okay, well then how do you go in and help them grow and develop? Just all the, the sport team things we talked about. As it's happening, meet them there and then help them grow, because someone did that for you. So you need to make sure you do it for the next people too.
I like that one. I think I would say to the executives that while this doesn't seem like a very big deal, this one thing, this performance management thing, ties into every system of a high-performing culture. This ties into all of those things. It will help your strategy. It will help people understand the goals of the organization and how they fit in. It will help your people. It will help communication. It will help management, and it will help process. This thing helps all of those systems. And so it is super integral to get it installed and get it installed well.
Yeah, it's the one piece, because it's not very exciting to talk about. It's the one piece that a lot of times gets missed, but there's a lot of research that shows that it's the most powerful piece of your systems that really drive engagement. It's the one that really drives everything. Your organization is a machine, and your machine is perfectly designed to get the results you're getting right now. And the reason that you might be getting the results that you're getting right now that you may not be totally happy with might be because you designed the machine one piece at a time, or you didn't design the machine and you just let every individual person design what each part was going to do, versus taking a step back and saying, what do I need each part to do? And how do I need them to work together? And what does success at every level look like, so that we can really make sure that the machine works together and the parts work together so that you can get unusual and weirdly successful results. I think that's where we're headed for. So I know this wasn't the super exciting topic, but fortunately we're incredibly engaging. So I'm sure everybody had a great time.
I mean, sure, it was fine.
I love the authenticity of our team. Super valuable. You guys had to hear this one. So that's great. So thanks everybody for joining us. Appreciate our team, guys. I love you guys. You guys are fantastic. I just love having these conversations and talking and geeking out with you guys. You guys are great. So thanks a lot for joining us on this episode of the People Centric Podcast. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to the People Centric Podcast. We are so grateful for you joining us every week. If you like this content, please like and subscribe. Also, feel free to share on your social media with everyone that you know. It really does help us. If you would like to contact us, I have put our information in the show notes. Please reach out anytime. We love hearing from you. We will be back next week with a new topic. Until then, be well and be